In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Jesus. Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc and hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, February 1st, 2021. February is the best month of the year. Number one, because it is the month of my birthday. So I have a birthday coming up, so therefore, in and of itself, it's the best month. I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, I am going to talk about February, and it is an awesome month, not just because it's my birthday, but because it is the month dedicated to the Holy Family. So it is dedicated to Jesus, Mary, and Joseph as a unit, as a family unit. So we have devotions to the Holy Family during this month and all kinds of great stuff. Today, February 1st, is also the feast day of St. Bridget of Ireland, not of Sweden. And she is actually the patroness of Ireland. She was the first nun in Ireland. She knew St. Patrick, who was not Irish, by the way. St. Patrick was English, but he did a great service for the conversion of the Irish people. But St. Bridget was born a slave. She was born to a slave mother, so therefore she was a slave. But her mother was Christian, and then she was Christian, and she was eventually given her freedom by a Christian king and went consecrated her virginity to Jesus and became the first nun and did a whole bunch of great stuff. So she's actually the patroness of Ireland. So this evening we will celebrate her by making shepherd's pie, because who doesn't love shepherd's pie, right? And then we'll do our traditional corned beef and cabbage next month on the feast of St. Patrick. So that's just a side note. But what I really want to talk about is the month of February being dedicated to the Holy Family, because in our times, this is extremely important. It's extremely important for us to call upon the Holy Family for the sake of our own families and for all families in society in general, because of the fact that there is a diabolical attack at every step of the way towards the traditional, especially the traditional Christian family. Satan does not like the traditional Christian family because it ruins all his plans. Therefore, he attacks it, and we see this being played out in society. Sister Lucia of Fatima, the seer of Fatima, said that in the end times, the final battle would be over the family. And so this starts as an attack on the marriage, which is the foundation of the family. And then eventually, as we see now, it's just a whole attack on the children, abortion, and all kinds of, secular education, and all kinds of stuff. So, with that being said, I want to read a little bit from the Catechism about the Christian family, the family in God's plan, what we can learn. I want to give my own input, what we can learn from the Holy Family, what we can do to make our families stronger. And I just want you to know the overall, not the overall mission of parents towards their children has been lost in society. And the overall mission is very simple. It is to teach your children how to get to heaven. That is your main job as a parent, to give them that foundation, that education. And I'm not talking about secular education. I'm not talking about to educate them of how to be successful in this world. We need to educate our children to how to be successful in heaven, how to get to heaven, how to be successful in the next world, in the spiritual world. We have to train them to be little soldiers of Christ. We have to train them as soldiers in battle. We have their life with us for 18 years or whatever it is should be really looked at as basic training for the spiritual combat that we find ourselves in. So keep in mind as I go through the catechism that all the catechism is doing is pointing out the perfect family. It's pointing out the model that we should all try to follow and how society should react to that model. But we have that model in as an example given to us from the Holy Family. God didn't just come to earth, he didn't just crash land or incarnate as by himself or whatever. He chose to be in a human family so he could give us that model, so we could see the obedience of Mary and we could try to mimic that as women and as mothers, so we could see how Saint Joseph protected his family from Herod and took them. He listened to God, he was obedient to God, and that enabled him to protect his family from harm. And so our fathers and our men should strive to do the same. Jesus was raised in the Jewish faith with those traditions. They went to the temple. They did all the things they were supposed to do. They held their traditions. As family, we are called to do that with our Catholic faith. Obviously, not the Jewish faith anymore, but the Catholic faith. Jesus, as a child, was obedient to his parents. He probably didn't have to be because he's God, right? But he chose to be obedient to his parents and learn from his father and respect his father and take on his skills, his skills of being a carpenter. So our children should look at child Jesus and mimic his behavior toward, how he behaved in his family unit. So with that's really what the catechism, like you're going to see, is pointing out. They're just doing it in a more in-depth and practical way, putting it into context for us. But really, if you get lost or something, just always go back to that. Well, what would Mary have done in this situation as the mother of Jesus? What would Joseph have done? What did child Jesus do? And just use the Holy Family in their unity as a model for how we should act in our own families. So I want to read actually out of the newer catechism because I think they do a good job in the newer one actually, of dealing with the topic of the Christian family in modern times. And they have a lot to say. The church has a lot to say about the importance of the family. It is a constantly stressed theme, and it is extremely important. So I'm just going to start reading from paragraph 2201. This section of the Catechism is the family in God's plan, the nature of the family, 2201. The conjugal community is established upon the consent of the spouses. Marriage and the family are ordered to the good of the spouses and to the procreation and education of children. Now, we have to go back and reread that and see if this is still true because I would argue it's not. Marriage and the family are ordered to the good of the spouses and to the procreation and education of children. Now, that is how it should be, but as we see in our society now, that's not the case anymore. The love of the spouses in the begetting of children create among members of the same family personal relationships and primordial responsibilities. A man and a woman united in marriage together with their children form a family. The institution is prior to any recognition by public authority, which has an obligation to recognize it. The Catechism, within the first couple paragraphs of discussing the family, makes note, and you're going to see this a couple times, that the institution is prior to any recognition by public authority, which has an obligation to recognize it. It should be considered the normal reference point by which the different forms of family relationship are to be evaluated. So now you can see why they want to skew the reference point. If we're looking at the family as a reference point, why Satan would want to skew and distort that so that we lose our reference point, so that our reference point is more oriented towards his goals. In creating man and woman, God instituted the human family and endowed it with its fundamental constitution. Its members are persons equal in dignity. For the common good of its members and of society, the family necessarily has manifold responsibilities, rights, and duties. And now we just see, all kinds of stuff. I'll tell you a little story real quick on a side note. Over the weekend, now I do not watch TV. I don't have it. I don't have anything. But over the weekend, I was watching something that I thought was just going to be interesting and I couldn't see how it could be politicized or whatever in any way. It was about glass blowing, the ancient skill of glass blowing, like making all these beautiful vases and whatever. And it was these glass blowers on the show. I forget the name of the show. And the idea was that they would have these little competitions and topics, and they would have to make these glass things. Well, they managed to completely make it diabolical, if you could believe that. It seemed to me that every person on there must have been screened to have certain political ideologies, and then the judges were obviously had an agenda because the topics were put out there so that these liberal ideologies could come to fruition. So let me tell you what I mean. One of the topics was in regards to they had to design some sort of AI technology that would like help in a real life situation. They had to make a model of it with their glass. That was the inspiration for their glass structures. So the winner of this little contest, this particular one, was a woman, and I use that term loosely, a feminist who created an outside the human, an outside the female body womb that would be able to sustain life in an artificial womb that men could then wear and simulate carrying a child and giving birth. So that's what we're dealing with in 2021, okay? like we we are sick. And I don't mean to get up on my high horse here and go off on a tangent, but we are sick. Humanity is diabolically sick, and at this point, I'm pretty sure it is irreversible. I know it's irreversible without divine intervention, and by that I mean a serious, serious purge of the sickness that has taken over. So, man and woman, I mean, and as a feminist, it doesn't even make sense because as a feminist, why are you giving away the very thing? The very best gift God has given women is to be able to carry and birth children. That is our superpower. So, how is it empowering to us to give away our superpower and enable men to take over that? How does that even make sense from a natural level? It doesn't. That's why this is complete diabolical disorientation. I mean, it's really sick. So, getting back to the catechism, let's move on to 2204, and this is in regards to the Christian family. The Christian family, so the nature of the family was the natural family in the first part of it. So nobody can, disagree that, well, that's not true. I shouldn't say that. The natural law states that family is made up of this, bonds of man, woman, and child. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Christian family, and this is kind of the supernatural responsibilities and whatnot, bonds of the Christian family. The Christian family constitutes a specific revelation and realization of ecclesial communion, and for this reason, it can and should be called a domestic church. It is a community of faith, hope, and charity. Going back to the natural, this is important to figure out this or to understand. This is what I was trying to get at. You don't have to be a Christian to see value in the natural order of the family. That's my point. Okay. So for Christians, though, we should and can be called the domestic church. It is a community of faith, hope, and charity. It assumes singular importance in the church as evident in the New Testament. The Christian family is a communion of persons, a sign and image of the communion of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I really like how they describe that because what do we know? We have God the Father head, then we have God the Son, and from their love and relationship comes the Holy Spirit, right? So it can kind of be said that, the human mother and the human father, from their bonds of love comes the child. Or at least that's how it should be. In the procreation and education of children, it reflects the Father's work of creation. It is called to partake of the prayer and sacrifice of Christ. Daily prayer and the reading of the Word of God strengthen it in charity. The Christian family has an even evangelizing and missionary task. The relationships within the family bring an affinity of feelings, affections, and interests, arising above all from the members' respect for one another. The family is a privileged community called to achieve a sharing of thought and common deliberation by the spouses, as well as their eager cooperation as parents in the children's upbringing. The family and society. Now, this is important. This is really what I want to focus on in this video because this is where we see the attacks taking place. Or I should say, this is why we see the attack on the family taking place. The family is the original cell of social life. It is the natural society in which husband and wife are called to give themselves in love and in the gift of life. Authority, stability, and a life of relationships within the family constitute the foundations for freedom, security, and fraternity within society. The family is the community in which from childhood one can learn moral values, begin to honor God, and make use of freedom. Family life is an initiation into life in society. The family should live in such a way that its members learn to care and take responsibility for the young, the old, the sick, and the handicapped, and the poor. There are many families who are at times incapable of providing this help. It devolves then on other persons, other families, and in a subsidiary way, society to provide for their needs. Religion, that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So to help those who, for whatever reason, have lost their family unit is one of the greatest things you could do. The family must be helped and defended by appropriate social measures. Where families cannot fulfill their responsibilities, other social bodies have the duty of helping them and of supporting the institution of the family. Following the principle of subsidiarity, larger communities should take care not to usurp the family's prerogatives or interfere in its life. The importance of the family for the life and well being of society entails a particular responsibility for society to support and strengthen marriage and the family. Civil authorities should consider it a grave duty to acknowledge the true nature of marriage and family, to protect and foster them, to safeguard public morality, and to promote domestic prosperity. Let me read that again because it's super important in regards to civil authority. And even like the Freemasons and the founding fathers, I will not call them Christian because they were absolutely not, although there were a couple Catholics thrown in there. But they, even though they believed in this Freemasonic, all religions are equal sort of thing, they understood the value of, in the natural realm, the value of religion in regards to the prospering of society. See what I mean? And that is what we have lost in our day. So civil authorities should consider it a grave duty, so a matter of the utmost importance, to acknowledge the true nature of marriage and the family, to protect and foster them, to safeguard public morality, and to promote domestic prosperity. The political community has a duty to honor the family, to assist it, and to ensure especially the freedom to establish a family, have children, and bring them up in keeping with the family's own moral and religious convictions. The protection of the stability of the marriage bonds and the institution of the family. Let me read that again. The protection of the stability of the marriage bonds, not redefining the marriage bond, just simply protecting it in the institution of the family. The freedom to profess one's faith, to hand it on, and to raise one's children in it with the necessary means and institutions, which means the civil authority has no authority to close down churches and whatever else. The right to private property, to free enterprise, to obtain work and housing, and the right to emigrate. In keeping with the country's institutions, the right to medical care, assistance for the aged, and family benefits, the protection of security and health, especially with respect to dangers like drugs, pornography, alcoholism, etc. The freedom to form associations with other families and so to have representation before civil authority. And I would argue that I see more of a role for the civil authority as, here's the problem. We live in an age where church and state state have to be separated, and that's why we're failing. Because really, the job of the state is to protect the institutions of the church so that the church can protect the family. I mean, that's really what it is. But now that there's a separation of that, the state is trying to take on this role of what historically was that of the church. So I don't know. But anyway, the fourth commandment illuminates other relationships in society. Our brothers and sisters, we see the children of our parents, in our cousins, the descendants of our ancestors, in our fellow citizens, the children of our country, in the baptized, the children of our mother, the church. In every human person, a son or daughter of the one who wants to be called our father. In this way, our relationships with our neighbors are recognized as personal in character. The neighbor is not a unit in the human collective, he is someone who, by his known origins, deserved particular attention and respect. Human communities are made up of persons. Governing them well is not limited to guaranteeing rights and fulfilling duties such as honoring contracts. Right relations between employers and employees, between those who govern and citizens, presuppose a natural goodwill in keeping with the dignity of human persons, concerned for justice and fraternity. And then we get on to the duties of the different family members, and I do want to just point out a couple of things the duties of parents because it's super important. Um, so this is 22:21. The fecundity of conjugal love cannot be reduced solely to the procreation of children, but must extend to their moral education and their spiritual formation. The role of parents in education is of such importance. Now we're talking about, like they said, moral and spiritual education is of such importance that it is almost impossible to provide an adequate substitute. The right and the duty of parents to educate their children are primordial and inalienable. Parents must regard their children as children of God and respect them as human persons. Showing themselves obedient to the will of the Father in heaven, they educate their children to fulfill God's law. And here's the problem. We as parents have been told that, to secularize education. So it should go to the public education systems who are filling our kids' head with garbage from Satan. And the state, again, is overstepping and trying to fill the role of the parents. They're trying to teach them, they indoctrinate them into the religion of humanism. And it's a real problem. So, parents have the first responsibility for the education of their children. They bear witness to this responsibility first by creating a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule. The home is well suited for education in the virtues. This requires an apprenticeship in self denial, second judgment, and self mastery, the preconditions of all true freedom. Parents should teach their children to subordinate the material and instinctual dimensions to interior and spiritual ones. Parents have a grave responsibility to give good example to their children. By knowing how to acknowledge their own failings to their children, parents will be better able to guide and correct them. Exactly. So I make it a habit of when I have to go to confession, I'll let my kids know, like, hey, I have to go to confession, or they'll be with me and they'll have to stand outside the confessional while I go. And it's important for they have to see me do that to understand the value of it. And I'll talk to them about what penance I was required to do and whatnot. But that's just one example. We have to constantly, if your kids see you pray, they're gonna pray. If your kids see you taking the faith seriously, they're gonna take it seriously. Kids naturally just look up to their parents. We have to fill them up with good stuff and not garbage. He who loves his son will not spare the rod. He who disciplines his son will profit by him. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. The home is the natural environment for initiating a human being into solidarity and communal responsibilities. Parents should teach children to avoid the compromising and degrading influences which threaten human societies. And here's the thing, if you send your kids to public school or whatever, you can't avoid them. It's impossible. because on one hand, the children should be obedient to their teachers, but when that authority is telling them that we have to tolerate man and man getting married, it's conflicting. It's a problem. So this is why as I'm saying, we're sick and we need to be purged of our sickness. Through the grace of the sacrament of marriage, parents receive the responsibility and privilege of evangelizing, I always struggle with that word, their children. Parents should initiate their children at an early age into the mysteries of the faith, of which they are the first heralds for their children. They should associate them from their tenderest years with the life of the church. A wholesome family life can foster interior dispositions that are a genuine preparation for a living faith and remain a support for it throughout one's life. Education in the faith by the parents should begin in the child's earliest years. This already happens when family members help one another to grow in faith by the witness of a Christian life in keeping with the gospel. Family catechisms precedes, accompanies, and enriches other forms of instruction in the family. Parents have the mission of teaching their children to pray and to discover their vocation as children of God. The parish is the Eucharistic community in the hearts of the liturgical life of Christian families. It is a privileged place for the catechesis of children and parents. Children, in turn, and this is so true, contribute to the growth and holiness of their parents. Each and every one should be generous and tireless in forgiving one another for offenses, quarrels, injustices, and neglect. Mutual affection suggests this. The charity of Christ demands it. And there's a lot of good stuff. So, in the catechism I'm referring to. So go through and read it. Read the catechism's teaching on the family. So I'm going to skip over some of it and get onto 2232, the family and the kingdom. Family ties are important but not absolute. Just as the child grows to maturity in human and spiritual autonomy, so his unique vocation, which comes from God, asserts itself more clearly and forcefully. Parents should respect this call and encourage their children to follow it. They must be convinced that the first vocation of the Christian is to follow Jesus. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Becoming a disciple of Jesus means accepting the invitation to belong to God's family, to live in conformity with his way of life, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Parents should welcome and respect with joy and thanksgiving the Lord's call to one of their children to follow him in virginity for the sake of the kingdom in the consecrated life or in a priestly ministry. The authorities in civil society. God's fourth commandment also enjoins us to honor all who are for our good, have received authority in society from God. Let me reread that. Have received authority in society from God. It clarifies the duties of those who exercise authority as well as those who benefit from it. Duties of the civil authorities. Those who exercise authority should do so as a service. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. The exercise of authority is measured morally in terms of its divine origin, its reasonable nature, and its specific object. No one could command or establish what is contrary to the dignity of persons and the natural law. So understand we have an illegitimate government, and we have for a long time. Why? Because of the sentence in the catechism. No one can command or establish what is contrary to the dignity of persons and the natural law. So, you can't make abortion illegal. You can't redefine marriage because it's all contrary to the law. So, as far as I'm concerned, we have illegitimate civil authority in this country. The exercise of authority is meant to give outward expression to a just hierarchy of values in order to facilitate the exercise of freedom and responsibility by all. Those in authority should practice distributive justice wisely, taking account of the needs and contribution of each, with a view to harmony and peace. They should care that the regulations and measures they adopt are not a source of temptation by setting personal interest against that of the community. Wow. Political authorities are obliged to respect the rights and those of their fellow citizens against the abuse of this authority within the limits of the natural law and the law of the gospel. Again, wow. Armed resistance to oppression by political authority is not legitimate unless all the following conditions are met. 1. There is certain grave and prolonged violation of fundamental rights. 2. All other means of redress have been exhausted. 3. Such resistance will not provoke worse disorders. 4. There is well founded hope of success. And 5. It is impossible reasonably to foresee any better solution. So keep that in mind. Just because you're Catholic doesn't mean armed resistance is off the table. Just saying. The political community and the church. Every institution is inspired, at least implicitly, by a vision of man and his destiny from which it derives the point of reference for its judgment, its hierarchy of values, its line of conduct. Most societies have formed their institutions in the recognition of a certain preeminence of man over things. Only the divinely revealed religion has clearly recognized man's origin and destiny in God the Creator and Redeemer. Only the divinely revealed religion. Talking about Catholicism. The church invites political authorities to measure their judgments and decisions against this inspired truth about God and man. Societies not recognizing this vision or rejecting it in the name of their independence from God are brought to seek their criteria and goal in themselves or to borrow them not from some ideology. Since they do not admit that one can defend an objective criterion of good and evil, they arrogate to themselves an explicit or implicit totalitarian power over man and his destiny, as history shows. The church, because of her commission and competence, is not to be confused in any way with the political community. She is both the sign and the safeguard of the transcendent character of the human person. The church respects and encourages the political freedom and responsibility of the citizen. It is a part of the church's mission to pass moral judgments even in matters related to politics, whenever the fundamental rights of man or the salvation of souls requires it. The only means she may use, are those which are in accord with the gospel and the welfare of all men according to the diversity of times and circumstances. Wow. So, what did we just learn about? We just went over the importance of the family unit, the responsibilities of the parents in regards to their children, and of course, children have responsibilities in regards to their parents, honoring their parents and listening and being respectful. But we also learned about what the relationship between the family and the civil authorities should look like. And as you can see, we need a lot of help in this area because we are just under attack every step of the way, down to the very fundamental law of abortion. I mean, the fundamental, the most fundamental basis of the family is, protecting the individual in the womb. Because make no mistake about it, as the Catechism points out, children first and foremost belong to the Creator, not to the mother. The mother is simply there to shape and mold, to bring the child closer to God, but she has no authority to kill that child. So the very basic rights of little babies in the womb are being violated right now, are under attack. Then on top of that, if they make it out of the womb, we have this problem of these men thinking that there could be two fathers, women thinking there could be two mothers, and all this other stuff. We have the problem of us, trying to create babies in labs with, what do they call it, in vitro fertilization and all this stuff. And it's all, we don't have the authority to do any of this. We're overstepping our authority and we're trying to redefine something that God is very, very clear about in order to ensure the success of society. So this is a good month to, focus on the family, get back to basics, and still some prayer time, and still some reading of the gospel with your children. Teach them how to make it to heaven, because that's really our only job. That's the most important job we have on earth as parents, is to help our children get to heaven, or at least have that foundation to get to heaven. For me personally, I can tell you, it doesn't take much to, you know, have that family units thrown off course out of the Garden of Eden, I guess you can say, metaphorically speaking. Just one sinful act by one parent can throw off the whole course, so to speak, of the child. Personally, from my experience, I was given this great gift of baptism into the Catholic Church. This beautiful gift, and because of the decisions of one of my parents or whatever, it was stolen from me for a long time. It was stolen by the enemy, and I had to fight my way back to it. And in that time, I did a lot of things that I would not have done if I had that foundation to begin with. You know what I mean? So that I now have to spend the rest of my adult life making up for, so to speak. But it is what it is. We all have our different journeys. God gives us graces along the way because He's merciful. But set your kids up right. Give them the foundation they need to understand. Really explain the faith to them. Like my kids, I don't just tell them, we this is what we're doing. I sit them down and I explain to him, do you understand why we do it this way? Well, let me tell you why we do it this way. And more importantly than that, it's also important to go over the kids love the supernatural. So they love, like, talk to them about miracles. That's how I bond with my daughter over the faith. My son is a little easier to bond with over the faith cuz I'm like, your job is to, like, be a soldier. You have to be brave. You have to be a knight. So you have to fight off the devil. That's your goal. That's your mission. So we bonds that way, like boy stuff. But my daughter isn't, she's a gentle soul. She's just a caring, gentle soul. So we bond over religion with the supernatural, the supernatural aspects of it, because she's very interested in that. So if I come across like a cool miracle or something, I'll tell her about it, and that has a different effect on her and increases her faith, and she finds it fascinating. And we have a podcast we listen to about people who call in and tell about their supernatural experiences with God, and we talk about how to discern if that's from God or from the devil, and we just get into this whole thing. So it's called Touched by Heaven, by the way. It's by a Catholic out in Ohio. I think he's blind, I forget his name, but it's called Touched by Heaven. It's a great podcast to listen to. So before I close out, I just want to say one more thing about how I like to think of the family structure, right? So if we look at it this way, we know that while we're here on earth in exile, everything is dark because it is ruled by Satan, who is darkness. But we are all born with light. Now, on a natural level, if you are born into a pagan family, or you were born into a Hindu or Buddhist family or whatever, if you're born into a family that is something other than Christian, and you're not going to be baptized in the faith and all this, everyone on earth is given a light, okay? Now, what family you're born into determines how bright that light is. So everybody is born with at least a candle, like a birthday candle, right? And what is that? That is the natural law. That's infused into all of us. So we can all see as humans the benefit of a husband and a wife loving each other, so to speak, or that murder is bad. We all know that in our soul because that is the light of conscience that God gives all of his humans that He creates. Now, if you're born into, say, a Protestant family, you're into a Lutheran or whatever, one of these other things, now maybe you have a flashlight because you have two sacraments. You have the sacrament of baptism, and then maybe you have the sacrament of marriage, right? But you're missing the other sacraments, and you're missing a bunch of, you're probably missing batteries for the flashlight or whatever, so it might go out or something. But the light you have the word of God to guide you and things like this. So you have the understanding that, there is a God and Jesus is His son, and we have to believe in Jesus, and we have to have faith to get to heaven, to get out of this exile, to get out of this darkness. So you have the flashlight. Now, if you're Catholic and you're born into a Catholic family and you're a baptized Catholic, born into the church, you have a bright lantern. You're more than a flashlight and you're more than a candle, and you have a potential to be a really bright lantern as your journey goes on. And you're given all the oil, to keep filling that up in the sacraments and confession and in, the Eucharist especially. But as a family unit, you have the potential to have all these lanterns combine. So if you are a husband and a wife that encourages each other to keep your lanterns burning, and then you teach your children, the right way, so now their lanterns keep burning, you have a potential to become a beacon of light, like a lighthouse. And you're because Catholics have are the only ones. Catholic families are the only ones that have this potential because we are given the fullness and the light of the truth. So potentially your family could be this great beacon of lights, this great lighthouse to guide other families, to guide other ships, to guide other people, whatever you want to call it, but to drive out darkness so that people can have a chance at knowing God and at getting out of that darkness. Because listen, in the darkness is where all the demons operate. That's how they get you separated from the light. And the further you go into the darkness, the more of a grip they have on you. They don't like the light, they don't want anything to do with the light. So if you're a family living in the divine will, you can be a beacon and you can be a lighthouse and you can be a great service to the rest of the world more than any other institution or structure or units on planet Earth. And that is the importance of the family, and that is why we have a whole month dedicated to the Holy Family. So, to conclude, February is probably one of the most important months of devotion in the time we are currently living in. We need desperately to have traditional Catholic families because we are missing lighthouses. We are in the dark as a species. We're just a bunch of ships wandering around in the dark, waiting to just either miss or hit icebergs like the Titanic, right? So we need more lighthouses. It's important. The greatest service we can do right now as Christians is to have traditionally Catholic families to be these lighthouses. So I'll post below in the description. If you're a podcast listener, check me out on YouTube, Joan of Arc Media, and I'll post a bunch of devotions, links to devotions down below. And just to encourage people, the goal of this episode was just to encourage people to take this month to contemplate the families, contemplate the Holy Family, pray to the Holy Family, have a devotion to the Holy Family, but more importantly, spend time with your family. Look at your family, figure out how you can be that lighthouse, how you can be that light in the darkness. Obviously, what the light doesn't come from us, it comes from God. But how can you allow God to make you that light? And really increase your devotion to the family. And listen, the secular world tries to take this away from us. They made this month about Black History Month, which there's nothing wrong with Black history, celebrating, great things that African Americans or Black people have done in the past, but the Holy Family is for everyone. The Holy Family is for all races. So let's not limit ourselves to one race this month. Let's anyone can benefit from analyzing the Holy Family and trying to imitate the Holy Family, especially the Black community. Or any race of people where there are a lot of absent fathers or there are a lot of, broken families. And I'm not judging anyone. I've already said on this video, I myself have a broken family. I didn't do things the right way. So I get it, but we can all benefit from this devotion, not just a certain group of people. So, with that being said, Virgin Most Powerful, Mother of God, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Holy Family, pray for us. Joan of Arc Media out.